We all know Jane Coon, a member of our UU congregation. What some of you may not know is that Jane enjoyed a career in the Foreign Service. During her service, Jane lived for nearly 10 years in 3 different Muslim countries. She'll have to tell us which 3 they were. I don't remember. Though she doesn't claim to be an expert on Islamic theology or Sharia law, as a woman, she had an opportunity to learn about family customs. Today, we have the good fortune to be able to hear Jane share some of her experiences. The title of her talk is Muslims Come in Different Shapes and Sizes Too. Welcome, Jane.
Muslims come in different shapes and sizes too. I grew up in a small New Hampshire town and attended the Congregational Church. There were no UUs. Our church was pretty austere. No cross on the church steeple, no saints, no stained glass windows, and certainly no kneelers. In nearby Dover, an old mill town, one Catholic church served the Irish, another was mostly Italian. A smaller Orthodox church took care of the Greeks. Stained glass windows, crucifixes, and lots of saints were big items in these churches. Our congregational minister read from the Bible, but we didn't take it literally. My fundamentalist Baptist friends never noted that the world was created in 7 days. Christian Scientists read Mary Baker Eddy. Episcopalians stuck with the Book of Common Prayer. A colleague gave my father the Book of Mormon, which Dad read but wasn't tempted to convert. In college, I joined a Quaker project and participated in Quaker silent meetings. A born-again friend attended church where congregants spoke in tongues. And, lest we forget, the Ku Klux Klan terrorized Black Americans while burning Christian crosses. If a Muslim visitor to the United States were exposed for the first time to Christianity, he might be quite confused. Many Americans, however, we Christians, I might add, come in many different shapes and sizes. Many Americans, however, see Islam as a violent, monolithic faith, practiced identically from Indonesia to Morocco. But is it possible that Islam, like Christianity, might come in different shapes and sizes too? I'm not, as Madeline said, a theologian or an expert on the Quran, the Hadith, or Sharia law. I'll try to describe something of Muslim practice, family celebrations, and ritual that I saw in Muslim countries where I lived. Many years ago, I was assigned by the State Department to Karachi, Pakistan. I knew Pakistan was a Muslim country. I didn't know a whole lot about Islam. Sure, the Quran was the holy book. Muslims prayed 5 times a day and fasted during Ramadan. Beyond that, I knew little about the customs and practice of Muslims. Soon after I arrived in Karachi, I had a vivid lesson in the fundamental divide in Islam between Sunnis and Shias. I watched a Shia procession wend its way through the city, carrying a towering replica of Hussein's tomb. Hussein was the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, and this annual event commemorated his martyrdom in a battle over succession, splitting Islam into 2 major groups, In its divisive effect, my Pakistani friends saw it as comparable to the Protestant Catholic split in Europe. Pakistan itself is predominantly Sunni, with a sizable Shia minority. A few days later, I had an introduction to a Karachi businessman. He was a member of a Shia subset called Ismailis, or followers of the Aga Khan. They were a small but important segment of the business community in Karachi. And thanks to him, I was later able to attend the coronation of a new Aga Khan. My friend also described other Muslim sects, rather like our denominations, including Memons, Hojas, Bohras, both Sunni and Shia. These sects had their roots in India, and I suspected that caste probably had a lot to do with their separate identities. The State Department had been reluctant to assign a woman to a Muslim country. I was a first in Pakistan. This was a long, long time ago, and there have been many since. But I found it an enormous advantage, not a handicap, because I could get into Pakistani families, which were mostly off limits to men. The Ismaili businessman, for example, invited me home for tea. His three cheerful wives together acted as hostesses, constituting my introduction to polygamy. They would not have been present if he'd been entertaining a man. Other Muslim friends invited me to set family celebrations at Eid al-Fitr, the big holiday following Ramadan. Children paraded in their new clothes, received gifts, and everyone had a great feast. It was a family occasion, a little like our Christmas. The other big holiday, Eid al-Adha, reminded me of the common roots in the Old Testament of both Islam and Christianity. Eid al-Adha celebrated the biblical story of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac. And at the last minute, you probably remember, God intervened and substituted a bull. To commemorate that event, many an animal, bulls, sheep, goats, and roosters, have met their end for the Eid al-Adha. I love celebrating the Eid feast with friends, although I never took to one delicacy, the fat from a fat-tailed sheep. These holidays help me better understand the Old Testament, which Islam shares. Once on a trip in the desert north of Karachi, I found myself sitting alone in the desert with some camels in the distance. Somehow, I sensed as never before the stark environment and the aura of those times from which the Bible and the Quran both emerged. More prosaically, I joined some women friends one afternoon. They were studying verses from the Quran before having tea and enjoying a good gossip session. It reminded me of Bible study groups in my hometown that I think enjoyed a bit of gossip too. My woman friends introduced me to another delightful custom. When a little girl, maybe 10 or 12 years old, fasts for the first time during Ramadan, even for a day or two, she is given her first bangles, marking a step into adulthood. Bangles are essential jewelry for Pakistani women. On another occasion, I attended a qawwali performance of devotional music. Strict Muslim sects abjure all music, but not the devotees of qawwali. The event took place in the home of a Pakistani from a prominent family who could afford the finest vocalist and 3 men on instruments. In the course of the evening, one guest was so overcome that he went into a trance and had to be helped out. Public recitations of religious poetry attracted huge audiences. A Pakistani woman friend, Rashida, and I attended the annual fair at the tomb of Shah Abdul Latif, the patron saint and poet of Pakistan's most southern province. His mystical poetry is recited and sung by both Muslims and Hindus. The fair, a mixture of pilgrimage and cultural festival, attracted thousands, landlords and peasants, businessmen and clerks, rich and poor. The poetry of Shah Abdul Latif mesmerized the audience. I couldn't understand the words, but the musical recitation suggested the power of his poetry. Rashida translated fragments for me. I remember one passage about the divine miracle of falling rain, which brings forth grass for animals in the desert. That night, there was a full moon illuminating the dome of the tomb, and we could hear a plaintive flute in the distance. On another weekend with friends, including Rashida, I visited the shrine of a Muslim saint in Saiwan, a village north of Karachi. The saint Shah Qalandar had been a disciple of Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet mystic. Revered by both Sunnis and Shia followers, those mystics and ascetics are called Sufis and seek a mystical union with God. At Shah Qalandar's tomb, Rashida and I sat quietly in the woman's corner, the atmosphere permeated by incense and the throb of drums. Throngs of devotees circumambulated the tomb. Women sat deep in prayer. A man was quietly reading the Quran, and several dancers moved rhythmically in a darkened corner. And occasionally, one would go into a trance. For some pilgrims to Shah Qalandar's tomb, Sufi Islam provided a mystical path to union with the divine. For others, the pilgrimage had more practical objectives: cure for a sick child, aid in getting a job, or help in school exams. Similar, possibly, to Lourdes or Guadalupe in our religion. Later, our little group was invited to have dinner with the hereditary keeper of the shrine, sort of semi-saint himself because of his job. Knowing that it would be all men at dinner, Rashida and I excused ourselves. Our 2 male companions reported afterwards that the host himself brought out a bottle of whiskey, strictly forbidden in Islam. Our none too holy host and his guests worked their way through the whiskey while watching a dancing girl. Not a picture of Puritan, straight-laced Islam, is it? Now, more seriously, we all know that the Muslim world has its fanatics. They attacked the World Trade Center, the London Tube, the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris. But the fanatics have also struck many revered Muslim sites. Not long ago, to my horror, the New York Times reported that a suicide bomber had detonated a bomb at Shah Qalandar's shrine in Pakistan that I had visited so many years ago. 90 people were killed, over 200 wounded. A Muslim fanatic had considered this Sufi tomb to be un-Islamic. That attack powerfully reminded me that we too often forget that Muslims themselves, both Sunni and Shia, are victims of that terrorism too. Even in Afghanistan, the Taliban now faces ISIS terrorists more extreme than itself. Since the Taliban took over, ISIS has bombed 3 mosques in Afghanistan. The Muslim world stretches from Morocco to Indonesia. I've lived in 3 different Muslim countries, Pakistan, Morocco, and Bangladesh. All adhered to the fundamental precepts of Islam, but everyday practice varied as it does in the Christian world. During my 2 years, especially in Karachi, I learned that Muslims, like Christians, come in many, many shapes and sizes. And I believe that very few Muslims would identify with the Islamist religious fanatics any more than we would with the Ku Klux Klan. Thank you very much.